the yeshivas that I went to all had a fairly similar structure. So you're given a bunch of sources by the teacher or by the rabbi, and then you go off and prepare them and study it together with your chavrusa, with your study partner. And so in the yeshivas I studied, it was typically for either 2 or 3 hours, and then you'd come back in and have an hour lecture from the rabbi. So we're going to condense all of that into 1 hour. But I wanted to give everybody a little taste of that Beit Midrash experience that I had in the yeshivas that I was in. So first I'll give a little introduction. Can everyone hear me? Good? Okay. So first we'll give a little introduction, and then we'll break up into chavrusas, study partners. It can be 2 or 3, whatever is comfortable for you, for maybe 15 minutes or so. And then we'll come back and discuss the sources that we studied and explore them deeper. Okay, so that's the game plan for today. Our topic is, does God really care about the details? So this is a question which comes up fairly often to me, especially as an Orthodox rabbi. You read the Torah, you study the Torah, there's a famous concept that there are 613 commandments. Sounds like an awful lot. Especially when you talk about the Jewish God who is infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing, doesn't need anything from me or you. So what is this really all about, right? So this is a very interesting topic to explore, and I think that by doing so, we'll gain a deeper understanding about our Judaism and the things that we do on a regular basis in our Judaism. So in Orthodox Judaism, we are guided by something called halacha. Is anyone familiar with the term halacha? Halacha is Jewish law. And if you study the Jewish law, it can be a bit overwhelming. The Shulchan Aruch, which is the codified Jewish law that we use today, starts with the moment that a person wakes up, walks you through the moment that you go to sleep, and then has, depending on which edition you're using, 30 more volumes, in case that wasn't enough, about all the possible scenarios that could come up in your business transactions, in relationships, etc. So, for example, when getting dressed in the morning, the Shulchan Aruch talks about how one should put on their right sleeve before the left sleeve. And when tying your shoes, you put on the right foot first, then the left, then you tie the left shoelace, then you tie the right shoelace, right? And you're getting into these incredibly minute details. And again, the difficulty becomes beyond the 613 commandments. Now you're getting into the very, very minute details of how I'm leading my life. There are laws about the proper way of using the bathroom. There are laws about anything that you can think of or experience. There's probably some Jewish law, halacha, that's written about it. So the question is this really what God wants? And does God really care about this? So the answer, obviously, is going to be yes. But the question is, how do we get to that conclusion, right? What is the theology, shall we say, that maybe we're missing or don't have quite crystal clear that gets me from, okay, I believe in God, I believe that God gave us the Torah. How does that then get me to, now there's a certain way I'm supposed to tie my shoelaces, right? And everything else that's included in that. So in front of you, you'll find 2 sources that I gave out that I'm hoping that you will explore with your chavrusa, with your study partner. And you might not find a direct answer to the questions, and that's the goal, right? I mentioned my yeshiva experience. So a lot of times, we would be given 10 sources to read that morning. And we knew that they were supposed to address a certain issue that we were going to talk about. And it would be kind of like this game of okay, I just spent 2 hours reading all these sources, and I have no idea where the rabbi is going with this and how this connects. But I think these sources will give us a great starting point in our conversation and raise some very interesting questions regarding these topics. So we'll break up now for about 15 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes, to study these sources. And I'm around. I'll be walking around the room if anyone has questions or comments. And then we'll get back together and explore these sources and more on a deeper level. Yes? Her question was, how did we get from one of the mitzvot to how we tie our shoes? Okay? So I'm going to give a very quick answer, and I'm not going to go through all the mitzvahs and customs. But just because we brought up that example. So the idea is, on a simple level, the right side of the body represents mercy, love, and kindness. The left side is justice, truth. So we always do things with our right first to show primacy, that we want that our love, our mercy should be the stronger aspect of our personality, of our daily interactions. And the left goes afterwards to show that it's secondary. Obviously, we value tremendously justice and truth, but we don't want that to be the primary, right? So there's kind of like an expression that you want to push back with your left and pull close with your right. So that's why the right goes first and the left goes next. Okay? Why are we tying the left shoe first? Because the tefillin, the phylacteries that we wrap, are wrapped on the left side. So there's a special idea, which we're not going to get so deep into today, about the concept of wrapping and tying on the left side first. So that's why the left side would be tied first and then the right side, right?
The interpretations came from rabbis over the years who studied?
Yes. Depending on what aspect of halacha and which teaching it is, will determine how far back it goes. And that's another conversation for another time. The concept of the Mesorah, the chain that we have going back to Sinai and the Revelation and the Ten Commandments, etc. Very much connected to this topic, but I do want to keep to the promised 1 hour. So, yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
Okay, I have.
Great question. That is a great question, and the laws change. Tie on the right side. Yeah. When a person who's left-handed ties on their right side. Yeah. Okay, great. I forgot to give an introduction to the sources. So let's jump into that a little bit. I guess just so we can all be on the same page as we discuss this. So the first one is from the Drashas Haran. His name was Rabbi Nissim of Gerona. He lived in the early 1300s in Gerona, which was later known as Barcelona, Spain. And his major works include the Drashas Haran, which we're reading now, which he comes to address a lot of the major theological questions and points within Judaism. He also has an extensive commentary on the entire Talmud. He's one of the early commentaries that came not that long after the codification of the Talmud. Okay, so I chose this source because the Talmud tends to be even more esoteric and vague than even these writings, and so everything that he brings can be found and proven through the Talmud, but then you're going to get, I would have to bring for you 8 different sources. We'd have to study 8 different passages of Talmud to get to the same point that he kind of brings down into one paragraph. So it's a fascinating work from start to finish, the Drashas Haran. And this translation I got off of Sefaria, which you can get online. They have sources and texts and English translations on a tremendous amount of the early Jewish literature. The next one, which source did I give you here? Was this Rabbi Chaim Vital? Yeah, no, this is Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. So the Nefesh HaChaim, the soul of the living, is loosely how you would translate that, was written by Rabbi Chaim Vital. He lived in the mid-1500s, so 1543 until 1620. And he was in Tzfat, in Israel, under the Ottoman Empire. He was one of the major students of the Arizal. I don't know if anyone has heard of the Arizal, but he is the source of the vast majority of Kabbalistic works that we have today. Came from the Arizal. He was a great Kabbalist, and until that point, there were only a handful of Kabbalistic writings. The most famous and popular is the Zohar, but the Arizal came and really, his focus was on the Kabbalah and teaching that and passing that down to his students. So this is from Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who was the one of his main students and wrote a lot of his teachings. So this is slightly more of a Kabbalistic look at Judaism. Okay, so that's the background for the sources that we studied today, a little bit about their authors. Any thoughts or points about the text? Yeah.
I thought it was very wordy, and it was very hard to figure out.
Yes, they are very wordy and difficult to figure out. This is one of the downsides of trying to translate from the original Hebrew, which is not modern Hebrew. Right, Mika? Right. Because I showed her the original Hebrew, and still it didn't make very much sense, which is an interesting thing. Those who study in yeshiva are learning more of a biblical Hebrew, which does not translate very well to modern Hebrew. And so the first time that I went to Israel and attempted to speak in Hebrew, I was responded to consistently in English. So yes, the challenge with translation is you have two choices. Either you translate the words literally, but then when you move into a new language, you lose basically the point of what's actually being said. Or you can make it really wordy, and you can get kind of lost in how much words there are as they try to get the essence of what's being said, as opposed to being like truest to what was written. So this is the challenge, and therefore I encourage all of you to harass Mika to teach you how to read and understand and translate Hebrew. Yeah.
There are two comments. One is, is it not possible that some people get overwhelmed by excessive detail?
Absolutely.
They tell a humorous story of the Hasid who dies and goes to heaven, being shown around by the angel, and he wants to know, do you have food in heaven? And the angel takes him to all kinds of food and everything else, but then the Hasid says, but under whose hashgacha does the and the
Yeah.
angel says, well, we're in heaven. Who do you think has the authority for the food? I'll take a food plate.
Yeah.
The other comment goes to the opposite, and that is the citation of not to harbor vengeance in your heart and act.
Right.
And don't we have
Which was in the first source.
saying, I am your revenge?
Ah,
I am
the Lord of vengeance. Yes. So that is
back to that.
that is exactly the point that the Ran is coming to address in that first source that I gave you. So two very important points were just raised. Number one, aren't the details overwhelming? Okay, which is part of what we're going to come to address today. Number two is there seems to be a contradiction in the Torah. And this is the point that was just raised. I'm sorry, remind me your name?
My name?
Yeah.
Steve.
Steve? Okay, so we have Steve and the Ran who are raising a very important seeming contradiction in the Torah. There is a prohibition, one of the 10 Commandments. There is a prohibition in the Torah which says, you shall not take revenge. That tells us that revenge is not a Jewish value. Okay, now throughout, in today's modern society, that seems to be pretty well accepted. But if you study history, vengeance was part of honor, which was certainly a value. So that teaching, which for us is thousands of years old, is relatively modern in the world at large. So you have one verse that says, don't take revenge, and then you have other places where God is referred to as the God of vengeance or a vengeful God. So this is the question that the Ran is coming to address, the difficulty. How could that be? How can you tell me that we're not supposed to take revenge and then praise seemingly the Creator for his vengeance? So there are multiple approaches to answer this question, but we're going to go with the Ran for today. And the Ran says that you have to understand what it means by God's vengeance. And so the Ran starts with the point that God's punishment is never proportional. And number two, and this is far more important, is that this is like a father correcting a child. Typically, when we think about punishment, so someone gets really mad, how dare you do this to me? And I'm going to lash out and I'll punish you for your bad behavior. God is not a grouchy old man with a baseball bat, and when you get on his wrong side, he comes around, right? So the punishment feels to us like punishment the same way that it felt like a punishment to Dasi last night when I insisted that she go to bed at 7 p.m., right? I'm not tired, right? It's okay, just rest. I'll check on you in a few minutes. Out cold, right? It felt like a punishment. It feels like a punishment when I make her brush her teeth. It feels like a punishment when I make her sit down and eat her dinner instead of going to play, right? It feels like a punishment to her, but it's not. And all the adults watching this happen see very clearly that this is guidance to make sure that she is healthy so that she grows up to become a well-adjusted member of society, right? And so this is point number two. When we talk about God's vengeance, it's not the vengeance that's talked about that we are not supposed to take, right? To us, vengeance is tit for tat. You did this, I'm going to do this. For God, it has nothing to do with that. You can't do anything to him. If you believe in an infinite being, if you believe in a God which is all-powerful, which is absolute, there's nothing you can possibly do that would actually hurt him or affect him. So the idea here is that when he sends something which feels like a punishment, the understanding that we have is it's like being put to bed on time.
How does that go together with the last part of the reading that talks about being visited by punishments in the world to come?
Excellent. So then the Ran raises, yes. Repeat the question?
Yeah.
So the question is, how does that then tie in to the concept of punishment in the world to come? Right? Because, that's the next point of the Ran, what we just said does not make sense for the world to come. It does not make sense to say that this is a correction to get you on the right path. Because after a person passes away, there is no actions, there is no growth anymore. The soul is just up there hanging out with God, whatever that means. So what's the concept of reward and punishment in the world to come? Right? So there's an old joke that someone went to the rabbi and said, what does heaven look like? So he said, well, it's a stender, it's like a podium with a book of Talmud and absolute quiet. So the guy was not very impressed. So he's like, well, in that case, what does hell look like? So the rabbi said, it's a stender with a Talmud and absolute quiet, right? So what's the idea behind that? The idea is what the Ran says next is the same way that I cannot go skydiving without a parachute and expect to have pleasant results. So also a person cannot violate the will of God and expect to have pleasant results. Meaning, the same way that there are physical reactions to my actions, and we're very careful with how we eat, and it's a no-brainer and it doesn't feel restrictive not to drink rat poison, right? So the same is true with violating the will of God. A person's soul cannot go through that experience without there being a consequence or an effect on the soul. So that's how the Ran explains the world to come, is that whatever I developed and built my soul into, that's how I'm going to feel after a person passes away, right? So there, the punishment, again, has nothing to do with how we typically think about the word punishment. And in Hebrew, there isn't really a word for punishment. The Hebrew word onesh, which we translate to punishment, doesn't really directly translate, which is why he's having this whole explanation. So the punishment in the world to come is really just experiencing how I treated my soul in my lifetime. If I treated it well, and I fed it, so to speak, and I stayed healthy, so then I will feel really healthy when I get up there. And if, God forbid, someone didn't, they will feel those effects, right? So that's how the Ran explains that. Why is this important to our conversation about God caring about the details? So I felt it was very important because I wanted to create the framework that we have to understand when we go into discussing, how important are all of these minute little details and the halacha, and isn't it going to just be overwhelming for people, etc. So the basic framework that we're creating here and we're talking about is understanding and recognizing that God interacts with us as a parent. In that, a perfectly healthy parent, which doesn't actually exist, but a perfectly healthy parent who doesn't react because of any personal ego or any other reasons such as lack of sleep or frustration or anything like that, just when a parent is at their absolute best, when they are just full of love for their child and only thinking about the child's best interests. That is how God shows up for us. And when we talk about the concept of the details and reward and punishment, etc., make sure it's in that framework, right? And this is a very, very common thing where I have people coming to talk to me, and there's a tremendous amount of guilt, and I think an underlying assumption that they're not good enough for God. And this colors a lot of religious conversations that I have with people, and it's very, very hard to break out of that mindset and to realize that that is not sourced in Judaism. Yeah?
That all makes sense to me, but then I'm having trouble with the whole idea that God is described as a jealous and vengeful God. We wouldn't describe you as a jealous and vengeful father when you are guiding your child to appropriate behavior.
Right.
And I like that metaphor for God, but how does that tie in with
Right.
describing
The words don't seem exactly to fit. You're raising the issue that the words don't seem exactly to fit with the way that we're describing it right now.
They don't mean what they seem to mean.
Right. So, excellent question. Excellent question. It's for issues like that Maimonides wrote his Guide to the Perplexed.
Okay, I'll read that tomorrow.
I will be extremely jealous of you if you can make it through in one day. But yes, this is a very big difficulty throughout the Torah. Even on a simpler level, if you read the literal verses of the Bible, it talks about God taking us out with an outstretched arm and all sorts of other physical descriptions of God, which also totally does not fit in our beliefs and our theology. So that's why there are entire books written on this. But I guess the short answer, and then we'll just have to move on. We can talk about it later. But the short answer is you have to look at the whole context and the whole Torah. So when you have one phrase which seems totally at odds with the rest, then you have something like the source that we're reading here, which explains what that one verse means when you connect it with everything else that we've studied and everything else that we've read and that we know, right? So I don't know if that's fully satisfactory. I'm happy to discuss further later. Okay, so I think we basically covered this. Olam Haba, the world to come, is what the soul has become during the lifetime. It's not an external reward or punishment. So the pain that the soul experiences is intrinsic, not imposed by God. And the main focus that the Ran has here is that nothing evil descends from above. Everything that descends from God is for good. That is also something which we can spend an entire lecture on. And how is it possible that there is evil in this world? Because there most certainly is. If you tell me that God is absolutely good, how is it possible that evil has come out of a being and a creator which is only and absolutely good? Okay, very difficult theological question. And I think I'm leaving everyone with more questions than answers today. Sorry, but that's my job. Okay, next. Ramchal. So let's talk a little bit about who Ramchal was and what did he teach us. So Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, Ramchal lived in early 1700s. He died young. He lived 1707 through 1746. He was initially in Italy, eventually made his way to Israel, didn't live very long there. I think it was only a year or two before he passed away. So one of his major works is the Derech Hashem, the Way of God. And it's an unbelievable work, which I also highly recommend. And at the end, my last slide will be a bunch of the sources with the titles of the books for anybody who's interested in further reading. But the Derech Hashem, so the Way of God, what he does is he starts at the very beginning of God's existence, who and what is God, and makes his way through all the fundamentals. So what does it mean to be man? What are the angels? What do they accomplish? What's the point to them, etc. And then he gets all the way at the very end. He spends a very short amount of time talking about the practical mitzvot, the practical commandments, such as saying the Shema, or prayer, or the study of Torah. And now that you've read about 500 pages explaining everything about Judaism, now that all builds into a clear understanding of what we're actually doing. Okay? So for all those who are sufficiently confused, no worries. I will stay here until we've completed the entire book. So here's the important part that I wanted to bring from the Derech Hashem from Rabbi Luzzatto. He talks about what God is, and loosely I'm going to just say this infinite being, okay? And based on that premise, he points out that creation cannot be for the sake of the Creator. If you believe in an infinite being who is lacking in nothing, then creation cannot be for his sake.
Cannot be for his what?
For the sake, it cannot be for the sake of the Creator. It cannot be for any benefit to him. Again, I'm jumping. We're taking a lot of premises here.
Okay.
But assuming that you believe in this infinite being, and that God is this infinite being, right? So that infinite means lacking in nothing. There's nothing that he's missing. If he's missing nothing, he's lacking nothing, then it cannot be that he created for his own benefit. If there was something that he needed, something that he benefits from, then that means he was never actually perfect and infinite to begin with. Is everybody with me? Okay, so, clear as mud. All right, at least we have the word clear in there. So, if that's the case, says Rabbi Luzzatto, God must have created in order to give. It must be for the sake of the creation. If it's not for the sake of the Creator, it can only be for the sake of the creation. So, God wants to give good. God doesn't go halfway. He's going to give the greatest possible good that we could experience. Does anyone want to take a guess or take a crack at what that would be? What is the greatest good that is in existence? Life, Torah, God Himself. Remember your name? I'm sorry? Yemi. Okay, so Yemi and Rabbi Luzzatto must have conversed before we started our class today. So what Rabbi Luzzatto says is God Himself is obviously the greatest good, and part of that is life, part of that is Torah. So connection with God Himself is the greatest good that I could possibly experience. What does that even mean, to connect with God, with the Creator? Belief.
Belief that there is a God.
Step one, belief that there is God. By the way, sidebar, in Judaism, we believe that even if one doesn't believe in God, they can still go to heaven, but also not for today. Okay, belief in God. How does one connect with the Creator? What does it look like to connect with God? What are we even talking about?
Be holy in what you're doing. Elevate the common to be more holy.
To elevate yourself. What was that? Ein Sof. The mitzvot. Okay, so we're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, so Susie. So Susie said to elevate ourselves. The more similar I make myself to God, the deeper my connection is to Him, right? And we all experience this. Not on superficial like personality things, like, okay, I'm very structured, and Rabbi Ari is like super energizer bunny, like, right? Like, that's not what makes us similar or dissimilar, okay? But what are our core values? What do we focus on throughout our day-to-day, right? Those type of things, the more similar we are, the deeper we connect with each other. This is true within our earthly interpersonal relationships, right? Somebody who really doesn't share any of your core values, hard to really be close friends with them. No problem, you can respect them, you can interact nicely with them, but our close friends, we share some deep, essential things in common with. Now, there's one very important thing that we know about God. He was not ever given anything. He just is. So if God gives me everything in my life on a silver platter, it's not godly. If He creates me as a loving, caring, honest, it's fill in the blanks, all the good things that we want to be. If He creates me that way, I'm actually not like Him. Because He was never created. He was never given any of that. So what I have to do, says Rabbi Luzzatto, what I have to do is I have to create myself. And that's what the mitzvot are, like Sharon said. The mitzvot were given to us as the guidebook, so to speak. How do I create myself to be like God, to be similar to God? So what we're hearing is all these details, 613 commandments, etc., right? So just like on a physical level, I don't think twice about 1,000,001 things that I do to get myself ready in the morning. When I get out of bed, I don't worry that spontaneously the floor collapsed under me or that my toothpaste suddenly became poisonous. I don't question the need to brush my teeth, right? So all of these things in our physical life, science has proven to us and shown us what we need to do to live a healthy life. So the Torah and the mitzvot are there as a guide to help us become more similar to God, right? And so the crazy thing is you can have somebody who's doing everything. They seem to be doing everything. And they missed the boat and they did not accomplish the point, right? Because if it hasn't done anything internally, if they haven't become a better person, if they haven't become more like Hashem, more like God, then what did the mitzvah do? Right? So this is the approach of Ramchal of Rabbi Luzzatto. Okay, now one source that I didn't bring, well, how are we doing on time? We got to wrap up, so we're going to skip that. And I'm going to get to our last source here, which was from the Nefesh HaChaim. And he talks about the concept of Tselem Elokim, that man was created in God's image. I'm sure we're familiar with that at the beginning of creation. When man was created, it says that man was created in God's image. So essentially, the Nefesh HaChaim says that every single one of our actions affects all the spiritual worlds up and down between us and God. And again, what that means, I couldn't tell you. But the point is that as we've developed and explained until now, we were put in this world, we were created so that we could achieve the greatest pleasure that there is, which is being connected with the Creator. And so the only way to achieve being like the Creator means I have to develop myself. I have to build myself. It also means we have to develop and build the world, right? The concept of tikkun olam. It means that on a physical and a spiritual level, God has put the ball in our court. Our actions have the ability to build or destroy worlds. It's a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful idea within ourselves and within the entire world at large. So, because we're short on time, I don't have time to fully explain this last source from Rabbi Chaim Vital. But one of the points that's made in the Kabbalah from the Arizal is that corresponding to every spiritual limb that our soul has is a physical limb that our body has. And each mitzvah correlates to one of those. So 613, and I'm not a doctor, and I'm also not a great Kabbalist, so I cannot break it down for you how the 613, but the Kabbalistic approach is that every single one of the mitzvot is an opportunity for us to develop, strengthen that limb of our soul, so to speak. And here's the good news and the cool part, which is we're a nation. We're not a bunch of individuals. If we're connected with the nation, and you do, your focus is on acts of kindness, and my focus is on the study of Torah, well, guess what? We have collectively fixed that limb, so to speak, right? And this is part of the deep idea of Am Yisrael, of being a nation. We're coming off of the holiday of Shavuot of the last 2 days. That was a key, essential factor. Before God could give us the Torah, was we had to show up as one body. Right? We had to show up as one person. We had to be unified. So the details matter because the details reflect a system that was built on God's infinite wisdom. God cares about the detail because each detail is another point of connection. It's another opportunity for us to give Him reason to connect with us and for us to experience that goodness and that pleasure that He wants for us. So here's some takeaways that I think that we should bring into our day-to-day life. What does it mean that my actions build my soul? What does it mean that my actions build the physical and spiritual world that we live in? Do I really feel and believe that my actions have such significance? Do I go to sleep at the end of the day and think to myself, what an amazing thing, I built a world today? And how does this change how we relate to halacha? How does this change how we relate to the concept of the mitzvot? And maybe we want to start challenging our rabbis, and that's okay, to ask, what is this all about? Is this just tradition, or is there something more? Is there something about my character, about my soul, that is supposed to be perfected through this service, through this practice, through this action? So I'm hoping for a lot of questions over the next couple weeks. And I'll come back to this at the end. Here are some sources for further study if anyone is interested. I also try to make myself available for one-on-one study sessions if anyone's looking for that. So again, closing thoughts. God cares about the details because He cares about you, right? And in parenting, there have been many studies done that have proven that the kids that do best are the kids that receive positive reactions for positive action and negative reactions for negative actions. Laissez-faire of just do whatever you want, it's all good, does not produce confident, well-rounded children. It's an expression of how deeply He cares about us, that He cares about the details. And with that, we will conclude and open to questions, but anyone who needs to go or anything like that is more than free.